Hey guys, Pastor Ben here with another review and reflection. Today I want to talk about this little tract called To Be a Christian by J.I. Packer. This is published and put out by Crossway. They have a number of gospel tracts that they produce, and I ordered a pack of these so I could have something on hand to give to people who are curious about the Christian faith, and just wanted to share my thoughts on this little resource. So it is beautifully designed. Some tracts can be um, quite dated or not very grabbing in terms of their design. This is a very simple, beautiful little tract. It is a tract. It's very small, kind of double-sided there, so you end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5 pages of text. So it's a very difficult task to think about how do you communicate the gospel to somebody in 5.5 little pages. But J.I. Packer is one of my favorite authors, particularly with this kind of thing, because he's so good at just kind of getting across a lot of rich content in a way that's digestible and in a way that's clear. And so I found him very helpful in the past, and want to give just a brief thought on this. So first off, as far as tracts go, I find this to be a very helpful one. It's a good one. It does a couple of things really well. One of the things it does really well is that it covers the bases. I mean, that sounds kind of basic, but there are just certain things you have to communicate the gospel. I think the way the Heidelberg Catechism kind of captures it is really the most helpful, which is to say it's somewhere in your presentation, it's somewhere in your conversation with someone. They need to hear about their guilt. They need to hear about God's grace, a lot about God's grace, and they need to hear something about their gratitude, that there's a call to a life beyond some moment of conversion, right? Which is what in a lot of the kind of 20th century, gospel tract stuff, there'll be a whole lot about your sin, maybe, and then often explained without context. And then there's this kind of call to conversion. And to some extent, that reflects the fact that most people have grown up hearing the story of the Bible. They were in church. And so if you're handing a tract to someone, it's kind of, one of its main goals is to kind of convict someone who knows that they've sinned and fallen away from Christ to come back to Christ, right? So you can see the context kind of shaping that. Well, we're in a very different age. We're in an age where people have not been catechized in Christianity and left it. They've never really encountered Christianity at all. Or if they grew up with Christianity, it may have been in a context where the gospel wasn't really preached. So you're working with a lot less knowledge. Now, having said that means that I think tracts have a pretty limited usefulness. It's better than nothing, and God can work through them. And a good tract like this is great to have on hand to give out. But I think we need to recognize probably we're going to have to do more legwork, more relational work than just handing out tracts and expecting that to bear a lot of fruit. Although I've done that. I've gone downtown to places and just handed out tracts, and oftentimes that'll provoke conversations that let you go deeper. So it's still worth doing, but we need to recognize a different context. I think Packer has that in view when he wrote this. He's passed away now, but when he wrote this little tract, because he kind of starts, in a sense, like the Heidelberg Catechism does, before just diving headfirst into guilt, he starts talking about what we're made for. What does it mean to be a Christian? That's kind of the question of the tract here. How can you become a child of God, anchored in the full reality of unquenchable joy, beginning in this life and ever increasing in the life to come? So he kind of starts with this vision of you're made for something big and beautiful and joyful. How can you have that? How can you experience that? And very early on, he sounds the note that this is something that it's not just an information problem. It's not just that you need to know certain things, but you need to believe them, and believe them for yourself personally, right? So there's that call to assurance. And then he just lays out very simply, what are the key facts you need to believe? And he kind of goes through 4 of them, and just covers the basics of the gospel. So I find that very helpful. One of the things that stands out to me about this is that it's very Trinitarian. He really walks through the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. There's a call to life in the church as part of the community of faith. And then at the end, there's this call to prayer, which, for some people is automatically going to raise the hackles of, ooh, is this like the sinner's prayer, this really simplistic view? I think while I have problems with maybe the way that often that has been used or expressed in the past, we definitely need to recognize that if we're calling people to come to Christ, one of the ways they're going to do that is through prayer, right? And so I think Packer gives a good biblical prayer that they can read. So what do I like about this? It's affordable, it's well produced, it looks good, it's well written, it covers all the basics of the gospel: guilt, grace, gratitude. It casts that vision of a beautiful life and frames all this in a very Trinitarian way. I like the fact that it does mention the fact that we're called to be part of the church. And one of the pictures he gives is that, it's kind of like a marriage, right? Like you make this commitment, but that's the beginning of something, not the end of something. I think that's really helpful with the tract, that people don't see this as like the end point, it's the beginning point. Having said that, there are a few things that, well, first of all, I'll just give one big caveat, and that is I was born and raised in the faith. I'm a Christian pastor, so this is all very familiar to me, and that makes it very hard for me to be able to read a tract and say, how would this land for just someone on the street? So I would almost love to have, an unbelieving friend read this and say, does this make sense? What did you get from this? What do you think he wants you to do or believe or whatever? Because I'm probably in one sense not the best person to say how this would land for an unbeliever. As a pastor, I'm encouraged that it does cover a lot of biblical ground. I do think it packs a lot in, right? Packer famously said, I'm, Packer by name, Packer by nature. He packs a lot in, and that might be difficult in that it's not as conversational. It hits a lot of the points, but does it explain it in a way that, again, someone who's not a believer can understand? I'm really not sure. And two other things I'll say is, while he does mention the church a few points, I would love for that to be a bigger emphasis, especially at the end of the tract, to say, find a gospel preaching church. If you pray this prayer and just go on your own, you're not really following Christ if you're not part of his body. I would love to see it as a paragraph kind of really stressing that, what's next. He mentions it here and there, but it's not stressed as much. And I know that he has that vision, so maybe it's just something that they weren't able to do for some reason, but I would have loved to see that. The last thing I'll mention is at the back, they encourage you to visit a link to a website, which I tried to go to, and it's now like defunct. So that's no good, right? To point people somewhere that's a dead end. So that's where I wish you would just said, point them to the church really clearly, make that a big emphasis, and leave it at that. But all things being equal, in terms of tracts, I think this is a good one. You can get from Crossway. You can get it in a pack of like 25 or 50 or 75 or whatever. Very affordable. I think everyone should have something in their car, in their purse, in their backpack, on hand to someone if the opportunity arises. So if you're looking for something like that, I think this is a good resource, To Be a Christian by J.I. Packer.